I'd like to invite our next panel to come and join us on the podium. There are 3 people in the panel. There's a slight change to the book. Unfortunately, our clinical trials coordinator is not able to join us. So I'd be very grateful if I could have Andy Macias, Courtney Hudson, and Martin Neely to come and join us. They're going to take us through Clinical Trials Explorer Overview as the first presentation, Emerging Med Overview for the second, and Cure Forward Overview for the third. We're going to start off, I think, with Andy.
Where's the... Good afternoon. My name is Andy Macias, and I'm a volunteer patient coordinator for the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. I appreciate your time over the next few minutes to hear what I'm about to talk about. Stacy, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of these projects that I'm working on. So we're supposed to be talking about clinical trials, and you're probably thinking, why is this guy talking about car wrecks? And I'll make the connection here in a few minutes. But in September 1995, I was a senior in college at the University of Texas, and I was about to begin U.S. Navy flight training. And not so much now, but back in the day, I was a pretty avid runner, and I'd log about 30 miles a week. On this particular occasion, I was on a route that I had jogged a million times before, but this time was a little bit different. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time and was intentionally run down by a group of teenagers conducting a gang initiation. I ran into a small ditch to avoid their car, but they were so committed to their endeavor that my only option was to try to hurdle the vehicle. I don't remember bouncing off the windshield, and I vaguely remember riding in the ambulance. I don't know who was the first person to arrive on the scene, and I don't know who called the ambulance. All I know was that I woke up in the ER, and they were treating me for my injuries. Somebody saved my life because they instinctively took action after witnessing my unfortunate plight. A few weeks ago in upstate New York, a couple of lumber workers used a forklift to lift a burning car and rescue a woman who was trapped in the car after they witnessed a T-bone occur. These men jumped into action because they saw someone who needed help. Who can't remember this iconic scene from 2009, U.S. Air Flight 1549 crash landing into the Hudson River after suffering a bird strike? But do you think these ferry boat operators had any idea that morning that they were going to participate in a commercial airline search and rescue operation? Were they formally trained in rescuing passengers from a sinking Airbus A320? One thing common in all these scenarios is that someone took action. People took action to assist someone else in need. They took action with creativity and the makeshift tools they had at their disposal at the time. I offer you these stories because I think we're hardwired to help. It's an instinct that we all possess, and at times we think we could never help in these types of situations because we have not been formally trained, nor do we have the requisite education. In some instances, that may be the case, but I also think we have a tendency to underestimate what we're capable of doing under duress. I'm often asked why I volunteer for the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. People often make suggestions that I do it because it helps me grieve the loss of my wife, or that I do it because it helps me make sense of her death. It's neither. It's time-consuming, and at times volunteering can be quite difficult, mostly when it reminds me of why I'm doing it to begin with. But I do it for a simple reason. I do it because I view cholangiocarcinoma the same way, the same way these people viewed their situation. They reacted as first responders to someone in need. They did what was necessary to hold down the fort until the professionals arrived. That's why I volunteer. So I ask each one of you to consider volunteering for the foundation. I ask that you take a few minutes and see where you can apply your talents. We wouldn't be here in Salt Lake City had not a volunteer said, I'm going to affect change. I ask that you challenge yourself and see what you can accomplish, and I think you'd be amazed at the results. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking about Clinical Trials Explorer, and this is one of 3 programs that I started as a volunteer. Trials Explorer is an online platform that is going to be available here in the next couple of weeks through the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation website for patients and caregivers to gather readily available information to make rapid and well-informed decisions about enrollment into a clinical trial. My wife Sarah passed away from intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma in October 2015, and I can only draw from our experience, but I'm confident there are many people here that have similar stories to ours. Like most patients, Sarah was unresectable, and we knew chemotherapy was not going to be a long-term sustainable treatment option, mostly because she was having immense difficulty tolerating the chemo. It's a tall order trying to explain to a newly diagnosed patient that the best management of their cancer may be participation in the clinical trial. But to those patients who are unresectable or where metastases has occurred, it is a conversation that's much needed. At the time, without fully understanding the complexity of cholangiocarcinoma, Sarah and I did not afford enough consideration towards the clinical trial prior to any treatment. We worked incredibly hard to get Sarah into a trial, and she responded remarkably well to the treatment. But in retrospect, the clinical trial was something we probably should have done a little bit earlier. We just didn't know enough to do that. So we cannot find a cure for cholangiocarcinoma without research. This we know. However, I believe that research alone will not be enough to transform cholangio into a chronic disease. I think it will also require patients and their caregivers to be bigger participants and have larger voices in their own treatment. Patients respond differently to trials, and we don't know which ones are going to work and which ones will not. But I firmly believe that if we can help arm newly diagnosed patients and their caregivers with accurate empirical information delivered by other patients and caregivers, they will be able to make rapid and well-informed decisions about enrollment into a clinical trial. These are the reasons why I started Clinical Trial Explorer. So I designed Explorer to address the most difficult challenges we encountered during our clinical trial experience. I wanted Clinical Trials Explorer to have the capacity to explain, to engage, to explore, and finally to enroll. And I'll explain what each of those things mean here in a second. First, I'll start with explain. I believe it starts with explaining to newly diagnosed patients why they should give consideration to clinical trials very early, if not before initiating treatment. We recognize that trials are not always appropriate, but it doesn't make these conversations any less prudent. The website offers a place to engage. Patients on clinical trials are experts in their experience. Clinical Trials Explorer gives these experts an online platform to dialogue with other patients and caregivers about their clinical trial experience. I believe that by learning from each other, we minimize duplication of effort or the recreation of the wheel. I'm convinced the path to a cure is found by capturing, then building off these successes. The website makes it easier to explore. Patients should be able to focus on exploring every available form of treatment and not expend energy on overcoming administrative barriers or bureaucracy. By partnering with innovative organizations like Cure Forward and Emerging Med, Clinical Trials Explorer lowers the frustrating and time-consuming barriers to entry prospective clinical trial patients face. And finally, it provides an easy place for patients and caregivers to enroll into our patient registry. Our chances of finding a cure increase when we focus on what works. The cholangiocarcinoma community stands to benefit by collecting and analyzing data because this is how we can identify trends. Through Trials Explorer, people will be able to enroll into the Foundation's patient registry so that we may learn from each other. Promising research must first go through the clinical trial process before it can ever become an approved form of treatment. Clinical Trials Explorer makes information easily accessible to patients and caregivers and empowers them to make rapid and well-informed decisions about enrollment into a clinical trial. My vision is for this website to be the primary source for research that patients and caregivers will reference so that they become more of a participant in their own care. I am no different than anyone in this room. Anyone can affect change. Thanks.